This episode is brought to you from the past. While Sky is caring for a newborn, Will is in South America, and Amanda is, well, drowning in work, keeping the organisation alive. We are revisiting our favourite episodes from 2024. Here we go.
I just dislike that question intensely. I can show you the data. If you want to get higher achievement, you start with culture, you then work towards learning such that you get progress to achievement.
Why is that? Why is there such a shift?
What we are good at in education is finding difficulties and faults and fixing them.
There's a sense of shame in that. So we have to have that foundation of trust and that culture there.
Where in the world have you seen it done really well?
I'm not a fan of looking for the right country. We have it here. The problem is failure attracts money.
The best teachers I know are burnt out,
Aren't feeling valued.
aren't feeling like they can meet all of the individual needs of their students.
They want to have an impact.
Yeah.
We need to have systems that do that.
Podclass acknowledges the traditional and true custodians of the land we meet on here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We're grateful to be here. Today, we're honoured to welcome the esteemed Professor John Hattie to the podcast. For those working in education, John Hattie is likely a familiar name, known worldwide for his research into what truly makes an impact in the classroom. John is a distinguished researcher, academic, and the mind behind visible learning, one of the largest evidence-based studies in education, which has redefined our understanding of teaching and learning by examining the factors that improve student outcomes. His work spans more than 20 years of research, with his recent book, Visible Learning: The Sequel, expanding on previous works. The sequel synthesises over 2,100 meta-analyses, which draw from more than 130,000 individual studies and include data from over 400 million students worldwide. This is arguably the largest, most comprehensive analysis ever conducted in the field of education. John Hattie's focus is maximising impact in teaching. Hattie explores topics like teacher-student relationships, technology's role in learning, effective teaching frameworks, and delves into systematic educational questions like how school environments can evolve to better support impactful teaching and learning practices, and how educators can sustain growth beyond their early years in the profession. Reflecting on John Hattie's research, and having been surrounded by it my entire career, I find myself inspired by the clarity and depth he brings to understanding and evaluating research for educational outcomes. His commitment to grounding teaching practices in evidence and making that evidence accessible for all of us helps us to better connect, guide, and empower young learners. We couldn't be more grateful to have him here today.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you
When the students start to riot,
I'll be here for you,
even if your coffee's gone cold,
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Hello and welcome back to Podclass. You are joined as always by your host Sky, that's me, and my dear friends Will and Amanda.
good
Hello.
afternoon, morning,
And
whatever time you're
today-
listening.
And today we are absolutely thrilled to welcome to the studio once again Professor John Hattie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be back.
We are very excited to be talking with you today, and today's episode is the one about teaching culture. And so I guess we would really love to dive in because we are hearing there's a lot of rhetoric in the landscape around teachers leaving the profession, being unhappy, and that negative kind of staff room culture that can exist and fester in some schools, as we were speaking about off air. And we would really just love to hear your thoughts on how does school culture impact students' learning, and how can we, a lot of your research around teacher efficacy, which I'm sure we'll dive into, but really what are your thoughts around this?
Well, culture is the place to start. Quite often, particularly around Australia, we start at the other end with achievement, and we talk about good schools are schools with high achievement and great test scores, and they look good on NAPLAN, etc. And I can show you the data. We actually have some of our best schools in the country, our most successful schools, in the lower socioeconomic areas, in the lower achievement areas, the regional areas. Stunning. But there's this misnotion. If you want to get higher achievement, you start with culture, you then work towards learning such that you get progress to achievement. Achievement's the outcome, not the input.
Oh, louder, 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 louder. Yes, yes, yes. Sorry.
And
yes.
the nature of that culture comes back very much to, is this an inviting place for kids to come to? Like if I was Minister of Education for the federal government, the first act would be to lower the school leaving age to 10. And high schools would immediately realise they have to make it attractive. Now, got some perverse
I like
some
that.
consequences.
I'm in.
It's got some, but my point being is we really should be asking our students, do you feel like you want to come to this class to learn what we teach you here? And we know about end of primary school, start of high school, about 4 out of 10 say yes. The 6 out of 10 have turned off. They come because they have to. They come because of their friends.
Oh,
So then
gosh.
we have to ask, why is that? So why is there such a shift?
Because kids can't sue. It's compulsory.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
therefore they
By
have to
law,
do
they've
it.
got to attend. Yeah.
Like if you look, for example, in the US, 2% of adults use high school trigonometry, calculus, algebra, etc. 70% use Excel or graphing. What do we teach? Now, it's a whole debate there about what we teach, but it almost doesn't matter. It comes back to this positive attribute, which I think is evident in so many classrooms around the country about making kids feel like they belong in this place called learning.
Which has to be the first thing, right? And
Yes.
that quote we spoke about off air is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have the best kind of school policies in place, the best outcomes in place, but if our
Prettiest
culture
looking
isn't
documents.
Oh,
I'm
we're good with
curious
that.
if we obviously Australia, we don't do it that well. If we're only 4 out of 10, where in the world have you seen it done really well?
Well, I just dislike that question intensely because I'm
Well
not
done,
a
Will.
fan of looking for the right country. We have it here in this land, so many excellent schools. And my statement when I was chair of AITSL to every minister that I had to deal with and every director general I had to deal with in 9 years,
How many was it?
66 of them,
66, there it is.
was should be a proud of honour that in your term of office you don't go to Finland, Shanghai or Singapore. I will take you to the best schools in the world here in your district. And some called me on it and I took them. And they were stunned how brilliant we have it here.
Wow.
That culture exists right here.
So we have the examples, we have the
So let's
ingredients to
start
draw
there.
from.
What we are good at in education is finding difficulties and faults and fixing them. What we're not good is at finding excellence and scaling it up.
Yeah.
And that comes back to the culture we're going to talk about in the staff room, is how do we scale up success? Because we have oodles of it. Now,
So
I
how do
know-
we do this?
Well, the problem is failure attracts money.
Yeah.
Success often is tall poppy. But let me go one step further on culture of the classroom, because it's going to come to the culture of the school and the staff room as well. And that's the one we're talking about in the last episode. It's okay here to have problems and have difficulties, because that's the nature of what we are. Like if you go back to the visible learning work, the highest effect size of all is when you get a group of teachers together and they have discussions and evaluations about their impact. Like bring along 2 pieces of student work 3 months apart and say, is that 3 months growth? And like you would never do that in a staff room with low trust,
No.
because I've been in those sessions where the work 3 months later is not as good as the work at the beginning. It's tough,
Yeah.
but it has to be called.
And rather than like, I guess a lot of teachers would feel very judged in that. So
They do.
therefore there's a sense of shame in sharing
do.
and learning from that. So we have to have that foundation of trust and that culture there so that
That's where
teachers can
leadership-
say why.
And that's where
Yeah.
leadership is so powerful, is to create that safety so that happens, because that teacher is going to go back to that classroom and still think the same way about values and progress and achievement, and that's not doing their kids any favour.
Yeah.
But the thing that's stunning about that, the biggest effect in education happens when the kids aren't in the room.
That's wild.
And this is where staff rooms, this is where professional learning, and this is where my big argument is that the future of education in Australia is the future of our preparedness to invest in our teachers' learning.
Yeah.
And if I may, it's just, it's challenging because as I was saying off air, I have, the best teachers I know are burnt out. The best teachers I know are looking for,
Aren't feeling valued.
aren't
in the
feeling
work that they
valued and
do.
aren't feeling, appreciated and aren't feeling like they can meet all of the individual needs of their students. If the best teachers I know are feeling that way and potentially even considering leaving the profession, like where are we going? And what can we do?
Like it is very much a post-COVID discussion, and I'm fascinated, curious about why we're having this, because one of its effect clearly is we're shooting ourselves in the feet. and that we're perpetuating a dialogue about disaster when we're surrounded by excellence. And when I look at, and I've spent a lot of time trying to delve into this, our workload, it's no different pre and post COVID. Our kids, they're no more or less good or bad pre or post COVID. And we have to ask, why is it we're having this discussion? Like, one of it is we crazily ask this question about how many years do you intend to stay in the profession? And the answer seems to be less than 10. If we ask the opposite question, how long do you intend to stay in the profession? We know the answer is 16. We also know that the nature of teachers have changing dramatically. Like, Queensland's the only data that's got public information about it. What's the average age of first registering to be a teacher in Queensland? 38.
Wow.
Really?
The average age of going into teaching, initial teacher education, has been 26, 27 for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
40% of people in teacher education are doing it completely offline, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Offline or online?
Sorry, online.
They're studying.
40% are studying online.
Yeah,
Because we looked at the data the other day that a median age of a teacher has increased like 10 years in the past 30.
And that's because it's becoming a second or third profession.
Yeah.
And that's starting to be reflected in the discussion. Like, they didn't stay in the other two jobs 10 years. Teaching has to realise that it may not be a career for life, and we haven't accommodated that. Then on top of that, let me go back to COVID. You remember what COVID was like as a teacher?
Yes.
And? Good or bad?
To be honest, I actually felt sometimes I came back to the classroom more connected to my students than I did previous to COVID, if I'm being completely honest. But I found it
What about
challenging.
during COVID?
There were highs and lows. It was really challenging sometimes, and to be able to stay motivated, to log on to your Google account every morning and meet students was really challenging. We were pushed to be creative and to try new things to engage our classes, and to just, the priority for me as an educator at that time was to just make sure that we were staying connected.
But Sky, let me put this to you, and this is my hunch. I think what's happening now is we are complaining about burnout and workload, and my biggest concern is getting the right problem on the table. I don't think the problem is workload. I know, Sky, that if I took 10 hours off you as a teacher, you'd replace it with 10 hours.
Yeah.
What happened in COVID is you learned it did not have to be as relentless. You could take a moment to reflect. You could take a moment for a coffee. You could walk the dog.
Put a load of washing
put the washing on.
Yeah.
Whereas of all professions, nurses and teachers came back full-time to what it was. And I think what teachers are saying now is, no, stop. I don't want the relentlessness. And I'm delighted
I had an experience of what it was like to have some space, and now I'm thrown back in and it's full-time and it's full on, and I'm not coping with it.
And if you
So you're saying there hasn't actually been an increase in the demand on testing and reporting and
there's no
administration?
evidence for it at all. And like when you do time and motion studies, there's not many, then 90% of what a principal does, 90-something% of what a teacher does is what they choose to do. It's not compliance. Compliance is argued as the reason. And I think, again, we're raising the wrong issues. Like, I like what Queensland's done, legislated for a 4-day teaching week for teachers, not for kids, to try and say we've got to come up with solutions to the relentlessness problem. I know it's hard, particularly in a high school, to have co-teaching of the same kids, 2 or 3 day weeks. Some teachers don't want to work 5 days a week. This is a business where it's hard to do that. We know in high schools, those who aren't full-time is sometimes seen as lesser. It cannot be. So my concern is, at the moment, we've got the wrong problem on the table. We're trying to solve the workload problem, and it's not the problem. The problem is the relentlessness problem. And that's a very serious one, particularly for people who are coming in as their first, their second or third career.
So how do we then, yes, Queensland's got one approach, but how do we in our systems, like in Victoria and like in New South Wales, how do we create a culture where that relentlessness isn't so present and teachers feel like they can have a moment? Does that have to come from,
Leadership.
higher up and leadership?
I think it does. I think we have to deliberately create. It's kind of a timetabling issue. But let me raise a parallel notion. You were teachers for 10 years. Isn't it interesting that in the states that we live in, you reach your maximum salary as a teacher in a classroom after 10 years. The only way you can increase your salary and pay your mortgage is to get out of the classroom and go into leadership.
Exactly right. And there's not enough roles in leadership positions.
And there's
for
also
teachers
no
to be doing that.
correlation to impact.
After 5 years, you're right, there's no relation. But that's not my point. My point is that we don't have a career structure for teachers to stay in the classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the gig economy, like I think you talk about.
If I asked, if you decided to spend $100,000 of your own money next year on professional learning, other than your spouse, who would know?
I don't know.
Most people would think you're crazy.
Yeah, they would.
That's not true in any other profession. We
Yeah.
invest in learning. The system doesn't as well, and there's no recognition of it. I worked in New South Wales last year with the government to try and dramatically change the nature of learning, of teaching career. Like in Australia, in most states, except the one we're standing in, we have highly commissioned lead teachers. After 10 years, we have less than 1%. It hasn't worked. Why is the profession not recognising its expertise? I think this is another part of what we have to do. We have that expertise, but we crazily think that all teachers are equal.
Yeah.
Now, surgeons differ from GPs. That's seen as okay.
And it's challenging, right? Because you would say you might have an absolute gung-ho graduate teacher coming out, heading into their classroom, and they're having incredible impact and their students are engaged and they've got great results. Yet they're looking at educators perhaps who've been in the profession for 30 or 40 years, maybe aren't seen to be working like as hard or are very like hesitant or resistant to change or new ideas coming through or classroom approaches. And that graduate teacher is going to become disillusioned quite quickly with their sense of value, place and worth in that schooling environment.
They do. And when you add that to the relentlessness problem and to the current debate about how bad teaching is, it's not a healthy situation.
So we need to shift the narrative. The narrative needs to be looking
this
at
is where
excellence
leadership
and
makes the
looking at
difference.
what works.
So I'm curious. I've been teaching for 4 years. I'm not in leadership. What can I do personally to contribute to either culture or my personal well-being?
Well, I think the first thing is the nature of the team you're in as a professional, your team of colleagues and the staff. Whether the staff room is set up so you can have discussions about difficult problems, difficult situations, how you can work through them, how you can grow, how you can improve, how you can collectively work together to look at your impact and improve it. Like, I don't think there's a teacher in the world who gets up and says, today I'm going to make the kids' lives miserable. They want to have an impact.
Yeah.
We need to have systems that do that. And as we've been saying many times, there are many schools in the country where the culture of the staff room is a pleasure to deal with this. And those debates about how bad it is are not as frequent. And so I look to the school principals, but then as I've talked to the school principals associations, they shoot themselves in the foot too. Like they get up and say, oh, we have kids that have violence, we've got kids who have drugs, we've got parents, we've got this. And I want to turn it on its head and say, we've always had those kids.
Yeah.
You have the best coping strategies in the world of dealing with those kids and those parents.
Yeah.
Let's recognise that excellence and let's reward it and esteem it.
And even one step further than that, let's also look at the excellence that's already taking place, like outside of, the quote unquote troubled or challenging behaviours or students, but like who are showing those like really big leadership qualities, who's standing up in their class. And, it's focusing on all of those things. I think that's when we'll start to see that culture shift and that positive switch. Like I'm a huge advocate when people say, I'm going to study teaching or I'm going into teaching, like my immediate thought isn't, oh my God, please don't do that to yourself. It's like, what an incredible choice you're making to have impact on young people's lives. But we know that narrative is not the narrative that we're hearing in the media. So how do we as teachers, because we can't control what the media is putting out there, right? Or what gets written in the Age or whatever it might be.
Well, yes, we can. We contribute to it with the very thing you're talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, rather than talking about our workload, which I'm not pretending is necessarily light.
Yeah.
We should be talking about the impact we have, the coping strategy we have.
Yeah.
And as teachers, some of our kids are interesting. They're tough.
What do you mean?
Yeah, the wills of the world. And
so it's being conscious
we deal with
ourselves
them,
and
and
regulating our own dialogue. Yeah.
And some of those kids that are the most unpleasant are the ones that need to be in the classroom even more. And we're good at that, despite all those things. And so talking about the skills we have, talking about the capabilities, our coping strategies, our impact, and I think we need as a profession, and I think it's up to the leadership of the profession to talk about that. Like World Teachers' Day yesterday is where we should be celebrating the impact.
And being conscious of our contribution as well to those conversations that are happening in those ad hoc staff room environments or in the hallways. Like instead of focusing on the negative thing, walking out and being like, I just had an amazing moment in that lesson that I've just walked out of. And what's been the best part about your day so far? Instead of like, oh, geez, could it be Friday already? Like there's a big difference in that.
And also at the side of the sports field with parents, it's also in the media. Like we have an obligation to speak into the media like sessions we're doing right now. Let's talk about those successes. And I was delighted yesterday with an article in The Age, I think it was, of a teacher talking about why she is staying to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So good.
I just went completely blank. I had the best question, but then I was so present when you were sharing about that teacher. I know what it was. If I could give you a magic wand and you could wave that magic wand and you could implement one thing across the country, whether it be in the insides of teachers or within schools or within staff rooms or within classrooms, what would you do?
All right. On this question of culture, I'm going to be greedy and ask for 2.
Go for it.
You may have 2.
Permission granted.
The first is I want to get on the table about how we can collectively solve the relentlessness problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of my assumptions would be the problem has to be solved within the working day of the school. So we have to find space in the school.
Totally.
The problem there is so often when we create space in the school, teachers want to use it, not unreasonably, to do their marking and their planning. I want it to do the collaborative discussions about impact because that's what maximises. I think we need to be smarter on that hand at working with teachers to show them the incredible ways in which AI and ChatGPT can reduce their workload dramatically. And it's going to happen that effect on teachers far faster than it will have on kids. So that's the first. The second is I think we seriously have to sit down and say we need a career structure for teachers.
Yeah.
I know how hard it is to do. I know the resistances. Some of our school leaders will get very angry when they find that some of their teachers are paid more than them. This is something we have to work through. But we do need a career. Otherwise, we are going to continually, and it's happening now, those teachers coming in at age 27 and 30, doing their 10 years and realising that's it, are leaving, and that's going to be a spike. And I think that's very unfortunate. But it applies to everybody, no matter where do they enter, that we really do need to find a way to structure the career structure of teachers. And we've already got...
So there continues to be a trajectory.
We've already got, I think, the only country in the world with legislation where we have 4 levels of teachers, graduate, proficient, highly accomplished and lead.
Yeah.
Let's find ways to really implement that well, really esteem it, and how we can get the educators then to stand up and esteem their impact because, wow, my research says they have oodles of it.
Yes, and they're intrinsically motivated to make a difference. It's why a majority of us choose to be in this profession in the first place. So why wouldn't we be motivated to continue to have that impact if we had structure and that support to be able to do so?
John, it has been a great pleasure having you today, and you have planted so many seeds of inspiration, I know, in my mind, and I'm sure in every listener's mind.
You've given me lots to think about.
I
that's
agree.
for sure, which is great.
John Hattie's latest book, Visible Learning, the sequel, is possibly the greatest piece of analysis on education that exists right now in the world. So if you are curious, I mean, I wouldn't call it a light afternoon read,
although there's surprisingly a great amount of humour.
I agree. It's very humorous. It's really
Thank you,
fun.
Janet, for that one.
Yes. Thank you so much, John Hattie. Thank you for your time and thank you for your contribution. And to all of our teachers out there, we are doing the good work, and take a moment to appreciate yourself and find a space in the relentlessness, because that's what we need.
And thank you for bringing the opportunity to bring these issues alive and to be debated and to be critiqued.
Thank you so much, John Hattie, and we will see you next week on Podclass.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Thanks so much for tuning into Podclass. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would adore it if you could go on to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be lovely. We would love to get this podcast into as many ears as possible so we can help and support as many people as possible who help young people. And if you're not already doing so, please go along to Instagram and follow us at podclass.aus.